Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Wednesday the 30th of March. I'm Andrew Wilson and this is Scotland at 7. This evening I have the latest daily update for you from Ukraine on day 35 of the illegal Russian invasion. Then I'll introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Western and Ukrainian officials have reacted warily to Russian claims that it will significantly cut back its military activity in northern Ukraine after meaningful progress at peace talks in Istanbul, more than a month after the start of the invasion that has largely stalled in the eyes of the West. Vladimir Zelensky said the talks have been positive, but they do not drown out the explosions of Russian shells, adding that Ukraine had no intention of reducing its military efforts. President Biden said, "I don't read anything into it until I see what their actions are." And the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said he had not seen anything indicating that talks were progressing in a constructive way, and suggested that Russian indications of a pullback could be an attempt by Moscow to deceive people and deflect attention. What Russia says and what Russia does, he said, and we are focused on the latter. Moscow's lead negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky, said Russia's promise to drastically reduce military operations does not represent a ceasefire. In an interview with the Russian state-owned TASS news agency, Medinsky said there is still a long way to go to reach a mutual agreement with Ukraine. Following Russia's announcement, two senior US officials said the US was seeing Russia beginning to withdraw some of its forces from the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, in what it believes is a major change in Russian strategy. Another US official said any movement of Russian forces from around Kyiv would constitute a redeployment, not a withdrawal. The UK has also seen some signs of some reduction in Russian bombardment around Kyiv, Downing Street said, but it insisted the UK will judge tentative steps towards a possible peace deal by actions rather than words. "We don't want to see anything less than a complete withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukrainian territory," the PM spokesperson said. The UK's Ministry of Defence said in its latest update that it is almost certain that the Russian offensive has failed in its objective to encircle Kyiv. The Russian Defence Minister, Sergei Shoigu, said Moscow's main goal in Ukraine was now the liberation of the Donbass region, in a sign that Moscow may be switching to more limited objectives after facing fierce Ukrainian resistance in the first month of the war. Shoigu claimed the main tasks of the first stage of the operation have been completed. The International Committee of the Red Cross called on Russia and Ukraine to reach a clear agreement for the safe evacuation of civilians from the besieged city of Mariupol and other frontline places as vital supplies run out. "Time is running out for the people of Mariupol," it warned, adding that there is still a lack of concrete agreements for the safe passage and evacuation of civilians in the southern Ukrainian city. And the Ukrainian soldier who told a Russian warship to "go fuck yourself" while defending an island has been rewarded for his services, local authorities have said. Roman Khirbov was serving on Snake Island, known as Smyny Island in Ukrainian, when it came under Russian air and sea bombardment on the 24th of February. Ukraine's defense ministry said Khirbov was released from Russian captivity and is now home in Cherkasy. Now, we are lucky enough this evening to be joined by a regular contributor, Sam Paton. Sam's an activist and campaigner on the environment, green politics, and the Constitution. Sam, it's been way too long since last we spoke. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great, Andrew, and it's fantastic to be back. It's been such a long time, hasn't it?
Well, it's great to see you here this evening. Thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. Sam, I was just reading the daily update on day 35 of the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. Was there anything in that update that was standing out to you today as being a sign of progress?
I would love to turn around and say yes, but the thing is, the way things have been going lately with Ukraine, Russia seems to make these wonderful promises, false promises, and then they step back from them. I mean, how long did we hear on the news about them talking about that they were never going to invade Ukraine to start with, and they were making out that the US intelligence services were lying and fabricating, and then the next minute they obviously invaded Ukraine. And it's the same with the humanitarian routes as well. I mean, how many times have they turned around and said that they agree to humanitarian routes? I mean, these are routes that are, this is what we all know about, that people are needing to get out of these cities because they are being bombarded. They are being obliterated. They're not caring whether they're hitting military targets or civilian. They are literally being obliterated in front of our eyes, and people need to get out of there. And and for them to carry on shelling people and target Ukrainian citizens is just absolutely despicable. There's no words. And I know you've probably already covered all these things on the show, Andrew, over the last 35 days. But to see them actively targeting civilians, it's just makes me speechless. So when yesterday at the peace talks, where Russia had said that they would pull out of Kyiv, and I can't remember the name of the other city, I'm sorry, and they would concentrate on liberating the Donbass area, I think it's a load of rubbish. And I just think that we're going to have to be very careful. The Ukrainians are going to have to be very careful, because we all know that Russia is struggling with supplies at the moment. So is this them trying to resupply and pull themselves back together? And this is what they're going to use, this like a false kind of sense of security for the Ukrainian forces. I would be really worried if I was living in Ukraine right now, or I had family in Ukraine. I would be really worried about what's going to happen next.
Of course. And some of those things that you mentioned there, Sam, we will look at in greater detail during the programme this evening. But as you say, the targeting of civilians is both shocking and in contravention of international law. So let's begin with a story from Ukraine. Russia has been accused of intensifying its bombardment of the besieged Ukrainian city of Chernihiv and continuing to attack Kyiv, despite claims that the Kremlin would draw back out of respect for ongoing peace talks. Vladislav Atroshenko, Chernihiv's mayor, said the Russians had lied and that they were continuing to heavily hit his city, which is less than 100 miles north of the country's capital. There was also continued barraging of Kyiv's suburbs, Ukrainian officials said, although Colonel Alexander Motyuzhanik, a spokesman for the Ministry of Defense, said there were some signs of troop movements away from the two cities. He said the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has been noticing some partial movement of certain units of the enemy from Kyiv and the Chernihiv areas. At the same time, there is no mass-scale withdrawal from those areas. So at the moment, it's too early to say if that it happens. The enemy has been withdrawing units which have suffered the highest losses in order to replenish them. As far as we see, the enemy has not abandoned its attempts to take or at least lay siege to the capital city and to Chernihiv. The Ukrainian military said Russian troops were also intensifying their attacks around the eastern city of Izium and the eastern Donetsk region, after redeploying some units from other areas. Authorities in Chernihiv estimate that about 400 people died since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began on the 24th of February, with civilians now living without electricity, gas or water. This morning, Atroshenko said, "The night was just as we expected, that everything Russia promised is a lie from the beginning till the end. That's why at night we had some serious shelling, and the Russians were trying to destroy all possible means of crossing the Desna River towards Kyiv." Alexander Markushin, the mayor of Irpin, a commuter town a few miles from Kyiv that has been the focus of intense fighting, said the city was now 100% controlled by our military and territorial defense, but that Russian attacks continued and that 50 Ukrainian soldiers had died in the battle. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials claimed that Russia was struggling to maintain fighting morale and that servicemen of Russia's 26th Panzer Regiment of the 47th Panzer Division, had been seeking to relocate away from the war. So Sam, Chernihiv's mayor said that the locals live in a real humanitarian crisis for weeks. No electricity, no heating, no water, and in only some areas of the city there's gas, meaning natural gas. Thousands of buildings are destroyed, he said. Now, you live in the northwest of Glasgow, and that's the same direction that Russian forces have been attacking Kyiv. Well, I know that Chernihiv is actually to the northeast, but bear with me. How do you? I think the same considerations apply. So, how would you react to the kind of conditions? No water, no heating, no electricity, no gas, thousands of buildings destroyed. How do you react to the conditions that the mayor of Chernihiv is describing?
It's just unthinkable. The funny thing is, Andrew, me and my partner have had these discussions sometimes in the evening. What would we do if it was to happen here? And you start off and you're full of, oh yeah, we would stand up to them and we would, but then reality starts to kick in when you're seeing what pictures, because some of these places don't even have internet access. So we're getting very, very little information coming out. It's snippets we're getting every now and again. And it's absolutely, it's just mind-numbing, the fact that, there's not the basics that we take for granted, being able to go to the shop and get food, being able to turn on a tap and have water. Now, we all seen what happened at the start of lockdown when people were panic buying and the shops, the shelves were pretty much quite bare. And we're also seeing wee kind of hints of that still to the Brexit reasons, but that's another story for another day. But so we're struggling and we're kind of finding things. Imagine just being able having no shops, no buildings. Your home, which is meant to be a safe place, is no longer safe. Where do you go and what do you do? Because the thing is, I don't know. Because we're surrounded by hills and rivers and so forth. Where do you hide? Where do you go? And also as well, I'm just over the hill from Fastlane. So we would be definitely targeted. There's nowhere to go. There's absolutely nowhere to go. You would, I don't know, you would just sit back and hope for the best, I suppose, and hope that somehow humanitarian aid gets in and the humanitarian corridors work. But the problem is, as you just said there in that story, I mean, I've not caught up with today's news. Russia's not even standing by what they said yesterday when they were over in Istanbul. So I just don't know what's going through the minds of these. I don't know what's going through the minds of Russia, because what's Putin's endgame? And I think that's what we need to start discussing, was what's Putin's endgame? Because he's got an endgame. And is it to completely obliterate Ukraine and the Ukrainian people? Or is it to, because if he wants to take over, why would you take over a country that you've destroyed and obliterated and chased all the people away? So we need to start discussing what the end game is, and the ones involved in the peace talks, NATO, the UN, humanitarian, they need to start discussing what's the end game here. We need to get into what's going on in Putin's brain, what's the end game, because that's the only way we're going to be able to help Ukraine.
Thanks, Sam. We'll be looking at that a little bit further as the programme goes on. But as you say, in the meantime, for the people in Chernihiv, in Mariupol and across Ukraine, and for those who have fled Ukraine too, we are all hoping for the best for them.
Yeah.
And let's look a little bit more about the situation with regard to those who have fled Ukraine, because more than 4 million people have fled Russia's utterly senseless war in Ukraine, the United Nations has said, as the Kremlin played down hopes of an early breakthrough a day after peace talks between the two sides. We cannot state that there was anything too promising or any breakthroughs, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said today. He said it was positive that Kyiv had outlined its demands, but that there was a lot of work to be done. Ukraine and its Western allies dismissed a promised Russian military pullback from near Kyiv as a strategic ploy after heavy losses, and Moscow's bombardment of cities from Chernihiv in the north to Mariupol in the south continued unabated. The UN Refugee Agency said 4,019,287 people have fled abroad since the start of Russia's invasion on the 24th of February. That's now surpassing its initial estimate that the war would create up to 4 million refugees. More than 90% of them are women and children. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, said on Twitter that he had just arrived in Ukraine and was beginning discussions with authorities, the UN and other partners on ways to increase our support to people affected and displaced by this senseless war. The agency has said that the speed and scale of the displacement was unprecedented in Europe since the Second World War. The UN's International Organization for Migration said that as of mid-March, 6.48 million people were also internally displaced within Ukraine. Ukrainian refugees in Poland are frustrated and confused by British asylum rules, which they say appear designed more to keep people out than offer shelter to those fleeing war. Figures from the Home Office have revealed that the UK has granted only 2,700 visas under its Homes for Ukraine scheme since it was launched more than 2 weeks ago. SNP Shadow Home Secretary Stuart MacDonald MP said these figures are desperately poor and they highlight the UK government's disappointing response to the refugee crisis unfolding in Ukraine. The UK government granting only 2,700 visas under its Homes for Ukraine sponsorship scheme, offering safety to just 0.6% of the 4 million refugees that have fled Ukraine, is what happens when bureaucracy and paperwork is prioritised over people in the face of the largest refugee displacement in Europe since World War II. So, Sam, unfortunately, the statement from Shadow Home Secretary Stuart MacDonald is likely to start you and me talking about the Home Office and Priti Patel, and that never ends satisfactorily and will probably get us both taken off air. So, in the first circumstances, let's talk about what Filippo Grandi's been saying. He said that the speed and scale of the displacement was unprecedented since the Second War. But to me, it's day 35 before the UN High Commissioner for Refugees arrives on the scene. Does this suggest to you that the UN is too slow or too big or too cumbersome? Or is it too constrained because Russia is a so-called P5, meaning Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations?
All of the above, Andrew. Basically, UN is too big. Russia, we being a permanent member, and they have been extremely too slow. They should have been in there right at the beginning, offering support. 35 days into this, and there's 4 million people already left Ukraine, that in numbers that they know of, that have, because there'll be a lot of people that have not they've been able to get out, but they're not being registered yet, so there'll be still figures catching up. And then 6.4 million people, you says, are displaced within the country, and that, again, that's numbers that we know of. It's just absolutely despicable that it's taken the UN this length of time, and they should be ashamed of themselves. They should have been in there a lot sooner. I mean, we've been seeing this unfolding in front of our eyes. They can't say that they're, I mean, to turn around and say they're shot. You knew this was going to happen within the first couple of days of this war. You could see that there was going to be mass amount of people leaving Ukraine due to the bombing and what was happening. And I just think they should be hanging their heads in shame. Absolutely hanging their heads in shame. They are not doing their duty, to be there for the refugees and things. They have failed in their duty of care to these people. And as for the UK, I'm on a roll, Andrew. I apologise, but I'm on a roll. But for the UK government, they should be hanging their head in shame as well. They are absolutely disgraceful. And see all the people that voted for Brexit, they should be hanging their head in shame as well, because this is what you have done. People fleeing war cannot get somewhere safe, and they need to be somewhere safe and secure. It doesn't matter which part of the world they're coming from, they're fleeing war, and they need to be safe. The mothers and the children and the men need to be somewhere safe and secure. These people are not benefit dodgers or anything else. These are human beings and human lives, and we should be taking care of each other. and then maybe, we can create a better society. Then we've not got so much shortages for people working in jobs and things like that. I'm just disgusted at the UK government, absolutely disgusted with some of the comments that have come out over the last 35 days from Priti Patel and the cabinet, and some of the things. They should be, every one of them should be sacked, as far as I'm concerned. They shouldn't be there.
Well, that's the question that's one of the questions I was going to ask you, Sam. We
Sorry,
saw, I
Andrew.
think, no, you're fine. Some of the media we've seen today, Priti Patel expressing how delighted she is that I think it's a total of 22,700 visas, 20,000 under the Families for Ukraine scheme, and 2,700 under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. So a total of 22,700 visas offered. Now, and she was how delighted she was with that. Now, it crossed my mind, and please don't swear you're live on Broadcasting Scotland. To your point, these are why is the UK government demanding that people who are seeking refuge for war apply for visas while they're in a war zone? Well, why do we need visas? These people are refugees.
Because they are incompetent, and they're trying to blame their incompetency and their mismanagement of running a country on refugees, and that's what they're doing. And then they try to say it's about our safety. Sorry, but people fleeing for war are not exactly going to come here and put our safety at risk. You're always going to get a bad apple. We've got bad apples who are born here, bred here, generations. So it doesn't matter what your culture is or which part of you are going apples. The other thing is as well, for the cabinet to turn around and say that they've got cabinet ministers there that have came from refugees, and it turns out they're not. They weren't refugees. It was through immigration, economic immigration. And that is disgusting as well, because again, they're turning around and, and trying to make out that they're there for the care of refugees when they're not. And it's absolutely, it's minging. That's what it is. It's minging. It stinks.
As we saw, Sam, yes, indeed, it's not words, it's actions that matter, both with President Putin and with Priti Patel. But we'll move away from the war in Ukraine for a moment now, because legal requirements to wear face coverings on public transport and most indoor public settings will be replaced with guidance in the coming weeks, the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced today. From Monday, the legal requirement to wear a face covering in places of worship or while attending a marriage ceremony, civil partnership registration, funeral or commemorative event will end. The requirement to wear face coverings in other indoor areas such as retail and public transport will become guidance on the 18th of April. The most recent ONS COVID infection survey for the week ending 20th of March indicated that 1 in 11 people in Scotland had COVID, with daily figures suggesting case numbers are very high. The First Minister told Parliament that the very high level of infection and ongoing pressure within Scotland's NHS had to be taken into account when making the decision, and that data will continue to be assessed closely. She said, "We will of course continue to encourage the wearing of face coverings in certain indoor places, especially where significant numbers of people are present. This phased approach strikes, I think, a sensible balance between our desire to remove this one remaining legal measure and the common sense need for continued caution, not least for the sake of the NHS in Scotland, while this wave of infection does subside," she continued. The changes to Test and Protect mean that from the 18th of April, most people without symptoms will no longer be asked to take COVID-19 tests. Free lateral flow devices for the purposes of twice-weekly routine testing will no longer be available for the general population, given the changing advice, but will continue to be free for any purpose for which testing continues to be advised, for clinical care, for health and social care workers, and for people visiting vulnerable individuals in care homes or hospitals. Until the end of April, people with symptoms should still isolate and get a PCR test. Vaccinated close contacts of someone with COVID-19 should continue to test daily for 7 days with lateral flow test devices. People who have symptoms of COVID-19 will still be able to book PCR tests in the usual way until the 30th of April. From that date, test sites will close, and people with symptoms will no longer be advised that they will need to seek a PCR test. The public health advice for people who feel unwell will be to stay at home until they feel better, to reduce the risk of infecting other people. So Sam, from Monday it will no longer be a legal requirement to wear a face covering in places of worship or attending a marriage, a partnership registration, a funeral or a commemoration. Now, this gradual relaxing of the rules and the ongoing gradual reduction of the restrictions upon us, do you think, is this going to be too complex a thing for opposition political parties in Scotland and the London-based TV news companies to grasp? Are you and I going to have to continue to endure endless confected deflections on whether or not we should have to wear a mask?
Yeah, you know what they're like. I mean, oh, they've been spitting the dummy so many times through this. They seem to find it very difficult to understand the rules and the guidance and the laws in Scotland, which is quite strange because, going through history, Scotland has pretty much always had its own rules and guidance and law for a lot of different things, including drink driving, so to speak. So I find it quite strange that they can't understand the rules when it comes to COVID and face mask wearing, but they can understand the difference of the law regarding drink driving. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how they're going to spin this one. At the end of the day, it's a bit of common sense. Wear a face mask. I quite like wearing a face mask. I get to pull faces at people and they can't see me, so yeah, it's quite funny. But no, on a serious note, people have got to use common sense and common sense approach. The thing is with people wearing face masks, the common cold and things have been going about less as well. There's been less bugs and things going about, so it's seeing what is a bit. It's weighing it up, and the thing is, there's other cultures around the world and other countries around the world who are still wearing face masks. I mean, if we look at Boris Johnson when he was his talks last week to do with the fuel, he was made to wear a face mask, and yet you don't see him wearing a face mask in England. So at the end of the day, it's not that difficult. It's not complicated. If you think you're in a crowded place and there's poor ventilation, and you think, yeah, I could be potentially able to catch COVID or even a common cold, then there's nothing wrong putting a wee face covering on. Absolutely nothing. Because the thing is, what we forget, even a common cold can be dangerous for some people who are clinically vulnerable.
Absolutely, Sam. As you say, it's simply a matter of common sense and basic respect for other people. It's something that seems in short supply in some places. But let's move on to another story from England this time, because police are examining 600 cases linked to the biggest maternity scandal in the history of England's NHS. Sajid Javid has said after a damning report into baby deaths condemned health staff for blaming mothers while repeatedly ignoring their own catastrophic blunders for decades. The independent inquiry into maternity practices at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust uncovered hundreds of cases in which health officials failed to undertake serious incident investigations, while deaths were dismissed or not investigated appropriately. Instead, grieving families were denied access to reviews of their care, and mothers were blamed when their babies died or suffered horrific injuries. A total of 201 babies and 9 mothers could have or would have survived if this NHS trust had provided better care, the inquiry found. In the House of Commons today, the English Health Secretary Sajid Javid issued an apology for the failings, telling MPs we must entrust the English NHS with our care, often when we're at our most vulnerable. In return, we expect the highest standards. But when those standards are not met, he continued, we must act firmly, and the failures of care and compassion that are set out in this report have absolutely no place in our NHS. To all the families that have suffered so gravely, I am sorry. Mr Javid offered reassurances that NHS staff responsible for the serious and repeated failures will be held to account. There is also an active police investigation, Operation Lincoln, which is looking at around 600 cases, he said. A combination of an obsession with natural births over caesarean sections, coupled with a shocking lack of staff, training and oversight of maternity wards, resulted in a toxic culture in which mothers and babies died needlessly for 20 years, while repeated failures were ignored again and again. Tragically, it meant some babies were stillborn, died shortly after birth, or were left severely brain damaged, while others suffered horrendous skull fractures or avoidable broken bones. Some babies developed cerebral palsy after traumatic forceps deliveries, while others were starved of oxygen and experienced life-changing brain injuries as a result. The report, led by the maternity expert Donna Ockenden, examined cases involving 1,486 families between 2000 and 2019 and reviewed 1,592 clinical incidents. Throughout our final report, we have highlighted how failures in care were repeated from one incident to the next, she said. For example, ineffective monitoring of fetal growth and a culture of reluctance to perform caesarean sections resulted in many babies dying during birth or shortly after their birth. There was a tendency of the Trust to blame mothers for their poor outcomes, in some cases even for their own deaths. What is astounding is that for more than 2 decades, she continued, these issues have not been challenged internally, and the Trust was not held to account by external bodies. So, Sam, this is an horrific story of a catastrophic series of events over 2 decades at this particular NHS Trust in England. One of the mothers of a child who died, a boy who died 11 hours after he was born in Telford, and the wee man died from Group B strep, pneumonia, and a heart attack. Now, his mother, Hayley Matthews, says that the report is shocking and that she wants to see change immediately. And she said that she will not feel any relief for herself or for the parents of the 200 other babies who have died until she actually sees progress. Now, given the apparent state in some areas of the NHS in England, do you think that Hayley Matthews will get her wish, and will she see immediate change in the maternity care?
I don't know, Andrew. I honestly don't know. I would like to say, yeah, I think she deserves to see that. But unfortunately, with the state of things with the NHS down in England, I don't think she will. And it's just horrific, absolutely horrific, what these parents have went through. And there needs to be a culture change, definitely, within that particular NHS trust, but right across the board. I think sometimes one of the things, you know, as parents, as a woman, when you're pregnant, you're always told to trust your gut instinct. And the midwife, if you've got a really good midwife, they will listen to your concerns, and your consultant will as well. I know they're saying it's been a cultural decisions between, the going for natural childbirth, but why has that happened? Why have the staff decided that a natural childbirth over a caesarean section is, where's that came from? Because one of the things, as a mum, when I was going into labour, with one of my pregnancies and one of my labours, I was told there was a possibility that it would end up a caesarean. Ended up it didn't, but I was given the heads up that there was complications and it could end up going down that route. But to me, I'm not an expert in medical matters or whatever. My only expertise in childbirth is giving birth myself to 3 children.
Yeah.
But you would imagine to a certain degree that these midwives and consultants would know when something was going wrong. So why did they not notice that something was going wrong?
Completely, Sam. It appears to be a case of failures at every level and in every respect in the management and the procedures that
Yeah,
were being followed in this particular hospital. But what we'll need to
yeah.
do, I
Has it
think, that
been
for the
down
moment,
to? Sorry, Andrew.
well, that's okay, Sam. What we will need to do is move to the next story. I'm afraid it's
Yeah,
another story from NHS England. And that is that the UK Government Health, the English Health Secretary, has announced that free parking for NHS staff working in hospitals in England will end on Friday. Parking fees were waived during the COVID-19 pandemic, but Sajid Javid said the benefit would end this week. Rachel Harrison, the national officer for the GMB union, told the PA Media news agency charging the NHS staff who've risked their lives during the pandemic to park at work is a sick joke. After years of Tory cuts, NHS trusts are struggling, we know, but scrabbling the money back off hard-up workers is not the answer. The government must now legislate for free hospital parking once and for all. The English Department for Health and Social Care said the perk was temporary and only introduced in July 2020 for the duration of the pandemic. It said that the scheme had cost around £130 million over the past 2 years. So, Sam, parking charges will add hundreds of pounds to the massive cost pressures already facing health staff in England, and I would argue reduce their morale even further. They haven't had a proper pay rise in the past decade, and probably won't get one this year either, despite the rate of inflation. So, what do you think is going to happen to staffing levels in the NHS in England as a result of this latest decision to put costs back onto the workers?
Oh, this Tory government are really a bunch of crackpots, aren't they? Basically, do you know something? Sometimes I wonder they're deliberately trying to destroy the NHS so it's easier to privatise. And it's like another cog in this machine of destroying the NHS. Because what's going to happen is you're going to get NHS workers who are not going to be able to afford the cost to get to work. First of all, you've got people having to deal with the cost of the rise in living, energy prices, food prices. You've got the cost of fuel prices. Everything else is going up. People's mortgages are going up. People's rents are going up. So many things are going up at the moment. Insurance is going up for cars. So how are people going to be able to afford to get to work? And never mind, they're going to have car parking charges on top of that. So what you're going to see is people turning around and saying, "I can't afford. It's not worth my while. I am in more in debt if I go to work than I am if I don't work." You will see NHS staff maybe doing career changes or going into the private sector, and that's going to put more pressure on the NHS. And then eventually what's going to happen is basically I would imagine the Tory government, UK government, are going to use that and go, well, we're going to need to start bringing in these private companies to plug the gap. And thank goodness we're up here in Scotland, that's all I can say. But my heart goes to the folk of England right now and the NHS workers in England. They are dealing with a no-win battle.
Absolutely, Sam. The notion that we might see agency workers who are not on ferries now working in England's NHS certainly strikes me. But let's move on to the next story now. That's because the UK government ministers have been accused of using more than £100,000 of public money to flood local newspapers and Facebook with Tory propaganda, with just weeks to go before the local elections. Facebook adverts paid for by the UK government in the past week are promoting levelling up, spending in more than 30 areas, including many places where the Conservatives are hoping to make gains or defend council seats in May. It has also used taxpayer cash to pay for wraparound adverts to cover the front pages of local newspapers, boasting of levelling up across the map of the UK with the Union flag. Places targeted include tight council areas such as Southend, Great Yarmouth, Derby, Wolverhampton and Walsall, as well as general election marginals such as Darlington, Blythe Valley and Stoke-on-Trent. There are also reports of radio adverts and even digital billboards in town centres. The Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities refused to say how much was being spent on the campaigns, saying it was ongoing and would be published in future. but the cost is likely to be far higher in total than the £100,000 spent on Facebook ads alone. The government has launched the spending campaign just before the official purdah period that prevents it from making public announcements or running campaigns, and this is leading to accusations that it's using public money for political purposes. So, Sam, is this our family and friends in England just beginning to get wise to the Tory government? After all, we know that in Scotland, Michael Gove, who is responsible for levelling up housing in communities, in Scotland, his own self-styled union unit spent £75,000 on advertising and almost £1 million on spin doctors in 2021.
Yeah, levelling up, more like levelling up their own pockets. It's just disgusting. I mean, I hope to goodness that especially the ones that voted for Tories and the last council elections actually take a good look at this, because this is taxpayers' money they are spending for their own political gain. That taxpayers' money is meant to be going towards health and social care. It's meant to be going towards education. It's meant to be going towards so many other things that we pay taxes for. Squanders it on their political advertising campaign, for their dodgy contracts and everything else that they've been doing over the last few years. And it's about time people actually, that with these council elections coming up, people need to actually make a point of saying no more and make sure they do not allow these people to get in as councillors. What do they think they're going to gain from it? They're not going to gain anything. They're just going to carry on using the public purse as their own private bank, and that's what's happening. That's exactly what's happening, and it needs to stop. It really needs to stop.
As you say, Sam, the public purse is a piggy bank, and let's look at a green story for you now this evening, because the energy regulator Ofgem has granted SSEN Transmission, which is part of the energy company SSE, provisional approval to construct a 2 gigawatt subsea cable between Scotland and England. The subsea link, a joint venture with National Grid Electricity Transmission, will have the capacity to power over 2 million homes, with investment estimated to be around £2.1 billion. It will run from Peterhead to Drax, which is in Yorkshire, and provide essential reinforcements to the UK energy system, according to SSE. These links are critical to our net zero ambitions, delivering UK and Scottish Government renewable targets and reducing our dependence on volatile wholesale gas markets by supporting indigenous low-carbon electricity generation, Rob MacDonald, the Managing Director of SSEN Transmission, said in a statement. Ofgem has also provisionally approved plans for a separate 2 gigawatt link from Torness to Hawthorne Pit, which is in Sunderland. The latter is planned by NGET together with Scottish Power's SP Energy Networks, and they're a subsidiary of Spain's Iberdrola. So, Sam, the Peterhead to Drax in Yorkshire and Torness to Sunderland, now, does this look to you like the energy distribution companies are getting ready for an independent Scotland, or are they getting ready for a severe energy crisis as we try to move to net zero in the UK, or are they just building infrastructure to move more and more of the great green energy generated in Scotland to the south?
Oh, how can I answer this, Andrew? Basically, one, they're probably terrified of us going independent because it's going to happen, and they know fine well there's going to be an energy crisis because in Scotland we've got 97% renewable energy up here, but yeah, we were criticised for missing our 100% target. Such bad news that 90%, 7% is absolutely amazing in my book. Down in England, they are still very much, I don't know what the figure is off the top of my head, they're very much reliant. They're 25% down there of the UK target. So they're 45. I'm getting up my year, and Scotland makes 25% of the UK target. So basically, in order for them to meet their targets, they've got to take that away from Scotland to make it look good. But also as well, energy prices are going up, as we know. But with this cable, what concerns me about this cable, or these cables, who's going to be paying for that? I mean, in Scotland, we already consider 97% of, we already pay quite high rates of electricity up here, and considering we're 97% renewable, it's disgusting. We shouldn't really be paying high rates. So what they're going to do is put this cable in, and the bills are going to go up. And are we going to be up here in Scotland paying for the benefit, or we're going to have to pay for that? And also as well, is Scotland going to get paid for the renewable? How are they going to work this in terms of our companies? Because the thing is, these companies, where is that money going to go into the Scottish Government through taxes, or is it going to go into Westminster through taxes? So it's going to be, it'll be interesting to see, but I think they're getting ready for, basically, they know fine well Scotland's going to go independent, and when they go independent, they're in trouble when it comes to their energy. They
Absolutely,
are in trouble, because they're going to have to rely on outsourcing more so than what they're already doing at the moment.
Completely, Sam. Thank you. And as you say, perhaps preparing the ground for independence, but in the meantime, the profits from these investments will go into private hands. We'll come back to Scotland now for our next story, which is that organisations which support victims and survivors of crime across Scotland are set to benefit from £48 million of grant funding. More than 20 diverse organisations spread across the country are set to benefit from the new Victim-Centred Approach Fund over the period 2022 to 25. They include Central Advocacy Partners, which is receiving £167,000 to support its work with victims with learning disabilities and autism. Victim Support Scotland is receiving just over £18 million, an organisation supporting women and girls, trafficking victims, and people from ethnic minorities will also benefit. The level of support underpins the Scottish Government's commitment to victims and survivors of crime, a key priority pinpointed in the recently published long-term strategy for Scotland's justice sector. In addition, a further £257,000 is being awarded to the Victim Surcharge Fund, a scheme which redistributes cash from offenders to enable organisations to provide quick and practical help to people who've been impacted by crime. And an independent review of the Victims Notification Scheme will commence in April and will be led by Alistair MacDonald, the former chair of Victim Support Scotland. And that scheme enables victims to receive certain information about the release of a prisoner, with the review considering possible improvements to ensure it is serving victims effectively. So Sam, in general terms, do you think that this latest announcement from the Scottish Government today, does it signal a shift in the Scottish justice system, perhaps to introduce more consideration for the victims and survivors of crime? Or is it too early to tell yet, or is this just window dressing?
I would like to think it is a shift towards supporting victims, because the thing is you hear all the time with victims saying they've not received enough support, and they would like, especially if somebody's been released from prison, they didn't know, and things like that. So, I mean, time will tell. It's about being positive and hoping it's going to do what it's meant to do. The thing is sometimes victims can be forgotten. They can be forgotten, and especially victims with learning disabilities and things like that as well. So yeah, it's a good thing. Hopefully it's a step in the right direction. Hopefully it's going to support those who need the support, and hopefully it improves things for victims of crime, and it makes them feel a bit safer, and their voices being heard as well.
Thanks, Sam. I think there is definitely a lot of work to be done, but if the Scottish Government is starting on that and this is evidence of that, then it's perhaps one step in the right direction. We have a second Scottish Government story this evening, and that is that a major plan containing 80 actions to improve the lives of children, young people and families in and around the edges of care has been published. The Keeping the Promise implementation plan aims to significantly reduce the number of children in care, with at least £500,000 over this parliamentary term to help families stay together. Other commitments include redesigning the children's hearing system, redesigning the governance of the care system, ending the placement of 16 and 17-year-olds in young offenders institutions, and reducing the use of restraint in residential or secure care. The Cabinet Secretary for Children and Young People, Claire Hockey MSP, said more than 5,500 people, half of them children and young people with experience of care, told the Independent Care Review that change is needed. This plan sets out for the first time over 80 actions that the Scottish Government will take to keep the promise to deliver that change. So, Sam, there's a great deal to unpack in this plan, at least in the time that we have available this evening. However, some of the key headlines I saw, as I said, were redesigns for the children's hearing system, for the governance of the care system, stopping putting 16 and 17-year-olds into young offenders institutions, and reducing the use of restraint in residential or secure care. So firstly, do you think that the ending of putting 16 and 17-year-olds into young offenders institutions will make a positive difference? And I'm thinking especially if funding is already very tight in the justice system and for local authorities, who I expect will be those who will have to care for and look after those 16 and 17-year-olds who would otherwise be locked up.
Yeah, the thing is it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because when you've got 16, 17-year-olds ending up in the young offenders institutions, are they getting support that they need, or are they going to end up coming out of there and then turning to more crime? It's a difficult one. It's all about support, and it's all about understanding what's going on, and they need to be able, in order for this to work, the whole promise system to work, including the children's hearings, the lot. It's about listening to the young people. It's about listening to the people that are involved within that sector, and whether it's social workers or the young offenders institutions, teachers, carers, everybody. It's about listening to all these people and about the kids as well. And it's also understanding the family dynamics that's going on in the background as well. Because sometimes, like, kids will play up or act out or do things that they really shouldn't do because something else is going on and they don't quite know how to, and they don't quite know how to get the words out there or how to tell the adults. Or so I think we need to, it's about taking a different approach, and it's going to be one step at a time. To turn around and make this big a promise and say we're going to change everything is not going to work. We need to do it. It needs to be done step by step, and it needs to be done in a mindful way with all these agencies involved, and just very carefully as well. But what each step will make a difference, and it's all about these kids growing up in a safe, healthy environment and growing up to be adults. Because the thing is, what we all forget is if we don't look after and nurture our children when they're growing up, especially teenage years, you're going to end up with a lot of problems at the other end as adults, whether it's social problems, mental health problems. And it's about looking after them and caring for them when they're still growing and developing. And yeah, I know it might sound a bit, kind of, some people might disagree with me and go, discipline, but it's about getting a balance. It's about getting a balance, teaching, and it's a lot of the time with a lot of kids and young people, it's about support. It's about support and understanding the world from their point of view as well.
Thanks, Sam. As you say, putting young people at the centre of these schemes and at this approach and this process, and also bringing all of the agencies together to work effectively in a multi-agency manner, you would think that those will be the way, and those will be the two important things that will give this approach and this plan, this Keep the Promise implementation plan, the chance to succeed. But that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. You will have seen from our Twitter feed that we are in considerable need for financial support in order that we can continue to do what we do and do more of what we do. So please, if you're able to assist us financially, then please subscribe or donate at the website that you can see on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. I would like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching us this evening, and especially I'd like to say thank you to our very special guest this evening, Sam Paton. Thanks, Sam.
You're welcome, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
It's been great. It's been a pleasure, Sam. Thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you can join us again soon on Broadcasting Scotland, but in the meantime, please keep warm and keep well. Bye-bye.